Well, happy Wednesday to you. I hope that this finds you well. Before we jump into a short lesson together tonight, I just wanted to share with you an update on our revision plans. As a church in January of this year, we had Steve Staten come in and provide some consultation for us. He interviewed many of you. He provided a survey that many of us took together. He took all of that information and produced a report that reflected some of the strengths and some of the areas that needed strengthening within our community. We took that report and we have talked about it over the last several months as a staff, as elders. We've talked about it in our small groups. We have worked it through several times in several different ways. And this month, at the beginning of the month, we had a leaders meeting as a congregation, and all of the small group leaders voted based on those conversations with their small groups for what would be the top 3 areas we would want to work on right now. Now we're gonna address all the areas in the report to work on, but we wanted to start somewhere. And so we felt like if we can get 3 areas that we begin to work on, that would be a great way forward. So those 3 areas that came out of that process were communication. How do we grow to be better in our communication together as a fellowship? Secondly, racial and cultural unity. We're a very diverse community, but we still have some work to do there. And how can we do that? And then third, what we're calling cradle to the grave. Really what that means is how do we shepherd all the life stages of our members? So from the youngest of our children in Kids Kingdom all the way to the oldest of our members, how do we take care of, offer discipling and encouragement and shepherding and meet the needs of every stage of life for us? We discussed the way forward would be best to create teams of volunteers from within our church community that would commit to an 8-week period of praying, discussing, researching, brainstorming, and ultimately proposing a way forward for us as a fellowship. We're calling these teams vision teams. And there is limited space in these teams right now, but we're looking for the greatest cross-section of diversity from within our church to represent each of these teams. And so we're asking right now that if you're interested in being a part of either of those teams, communication, racial and cultural unity, or cradle to the grave, that you would please submit an interest to your region leader by July 1st. Now, we can't guarantee that everybody will be able to be on one of these teams that submits interest. There's only about 8 spots per team. But there's going to be more vision teams to come, and we're going to do our best to get as many people in our fellowship involved in this process as possible. But if you're interested in serving in one of these 3 teams in that 8-week commitment, and being part of the process right now, please let your region leader know by July 1st so we can begin to develop these teams and move forward together. Okay, the thing I want to talk to you tonight about is listening. I can say for myself personally, one of the most pronounced things that I feel like God is speaking to me about right now in my life, with all that's going on in our world, with all the conversation that is happening, with all the talking, with all the sharing, with all that is going on for people and what they're experiencing and expressing, the thing that I feel like God is calling me to do is listen. We all know that saying, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth because he wants you to listen twice as much as you speak. And as someone who thinks that I'm right most of the time, it's really good advice for me, right? To just learn to listen twice as much as I talk. Because as a follower of Jesus, man, I am called to love people by listening and being great at listening. And people who Jesus loves and died for and who God calls his image bearers are speaking. And I need to honor that with the love of listening. They're expressing pain. People are expressing discomfort and anger and sorrow and disappointment and so much. And I really think, man, God is offering us an opportunity to learn and to grow closer to one another like never before. But the key to all of it will be, can we listen? About 2 years ago, I was doing some research for a series that we were teaching on Sundays in our fellowship around spiritual formation. And I did some research about this idea of listening and how it's going for us as a culture right now. And I came across these 2 TED Talks by a guy named Julian Treasure. He's an expert on communications and he's an author. And he had one talk called The 5 Ways to Listen Better. And if you go on YouTube, you can look at that talk. I just went on there again today to look at it, and it has 2.9 million views. So 2.9 million times this video has been watched to be a source of teaching people how to listen better. What's interesting is that right underneath that video is another talk that he gave on the TED stage that was how to speak so that others listen. So if you look at the views on that video, it has 27 million views. So how to speak so that others listen has 27 million views, and how to listen, 5 ways to listen better has 2.9 million views. What does that tell us as a culture right now? That we love to talk way more than we love to listen, right? And the truth is, this has always been an issue. In fact, even in the church in the first century, this was an issue. In James chapter 1, in verse 19, James writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." And so this Apostle James, calls all followers of Jesus to be quick to listen, to take those 2 ears that God gave them and to lean in, and to be slow to speak and to become angry. To keep your tongue managed and your emotional triggers controlled so that you can do what God desires, he says. And you go, well, what does God desire? Well, if you read on throughout the rest of that chapter, James makes the case that what God desires is people who will be humble learners, those who will be willing to listen and learn. And in such a polarized climate as we are in right now, the question becomes, well, then who needs to listen and who needs to speak? And my answer, and I think the answer of James would be you. You need to listen. Just like when I read this passage, what I feel God calling me to do is listen. To be one who is quick to listen. And you say, well, what if I don't get heard? And I think that's an understandable and a very legitimate fear right now. But the Bible is not advocating for anyone to be a doormat or to be a stuffer or to kind of just be a yes person who never expresses themselves. That's not what Jesus advocated, and that's not certainly who Jesus was or is, right? But your first century brother, James, is simply calling you to take a posture as one who listens quickly and who is slower to speak. Not one who doesn't speak at all, but one who is careful and considerate and sure that they are aware and understanding when they speak. You know, Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 12, verse 36, he says, "I tell you that everyone will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." Our words matter. In fact, the Proverbs says in chapter 18:21 that the tongue has the power of life and death. We can tear down or we can build up with our words. We can separate or we can bring together. We can reject or we can accept. We can wound or we can heal. We can distance or we can empathize with our words. So we must be careful and considerate and slow to speak, because Jesus only spoke in love. Just think about that for a minute. The master of the way that we are trying to apprentice and learn in this life right now, he only spoke love. And I want you to consider, as his follower, the high call that is in this moment. For me personally, I think that just means I've got to listen to the pain of my brothers and sisters who are in anguish for what they see as their people being discriminated against, violently and unequally and unjustly oppressed. And I have to lean in with my 2 ears that God gave me and be quick to listen and slow to speak, ensure that when I speak, I am speaking in love so that God is pleased. I need to ask questions. I need to listen. I need to be careful that when I speak, man, I am aiming to build up, to bring together, to accept, to heal, to empathize with my brothers and sisters who are speaking. I would want the same for me. And that's really what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. Like I would want, even if they don't agree with me, I would really want for them to listen, for whoever to listen to me. And when they speak, to speak the power of life into me with great love. And that is what I am called to. And that is what you are called to as followers of Jesus. We are in no uncertain terms in a very large conversation as a nation right now about race and inequality and injustice. Are we listening to those who are speaking from a place of hurt? Look, if we are defending our position, we are not listening. If we are explaining why the other person is wrong, we are not listening. If we are trying to make these teaching moments for others, we are not listening. If we are avoiding the pain and emotion that is being exhibited as people express what they are experiencing we're just appealing to facts as we see them, we are not listening. And if we're not listening, we are not loving. And we are no longer walking in the way of Jesus. And we are no longer living righteously, pleasing our God. God gave you and I 2 ears and 1 mouth. And it starts with you, just like it starts with me. And the action that we need to take right now is to be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to become angry. And this is a beautiful vision of God's community here on earth. That as we do this, we become more like Jesus and more for others, so that as a community, we can really exhibit a life and a way of relationally coming together and having ears that listen as Jesus calls us to. That we can be humble learners that are first learning by listening and loving in how we speak. May this encourage you, and God be with you. Amen.